speaking of this stuff like that, something I've seen on YouTube lately. I mean, I've heard some whispers in the grapevine when it comes to retro collecting. Retro collecting's been very weird in the past couple of years. We saw a big resurgence of retro collecting with the abundance of YouTubing retro gamers, including myself. Because when I first started my channel, I started out as mainly a retro channel, retro gaming. I mean, that's pretty much what XS Gaming was based off of. We talked about old games. We always talked about new stuff too, and I've always tried to push that in my channel as well. But it was a lot of channels back in the day that they mainly just focused on retro, and retro collecting got really expensive. And then the Nintendo Switch happened, and you saw a lot of YouTubers go from retro gaming to Switch because it was more accessible, it was new, it was Nintendo. And we've seen a lot of YouTubers that started out as retro that are now what they call Switch channels that are much more popular than they ever were when they covered retro because of the topics they cover. And, recently our friend RGT85, Sean Long, he made a video talking about how he just wasn't collecting retro anymore. He just said it just was not fun. And I agree with him because it's crazy to think, James, it's been 5 years since I sold my collection. We're going on 5 years. April will be the 5th year that I decide not to collect retro anymore. And just the past year, 2 years since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of retro games go up substantially in price because of stimulus checks and people staying home and people trying to start collecting again. And now we're seeing games that at one point were like, oh yeah, you can get it brand new for like $30. They're now like $70 to $80 now. It is insane. And what do you think about that, James? Because I know like we've always like collect retro, but you and I both have never been like, oh, we are retro gamers, we collect retro stuff. We always just like buying old games. Like, have you noticed, like, in your town or noticed around yourself of how retro has gotten just crazy?
I mean, I kind of like given up myself. I mean, I understand, like, me and you both have. A lot of
Hmm.
people listened to us for a while, but, probably seen where we did collect more. Like, it used to be easier. It used to be more fun. I mean, it's tough,
Yeah.
it's more expensive. I mean, if you really go out there and dig, hit up the yard sales and everything, like, you can still find cool stuff. But, I mean, like I said, I stopped. Like, I have a lot of things I've debated, maybe just like selling. I don't actively collect for anything other than really like Game Boy. I mean that any still handheld, like I'll still get those. I'll see them on Facebook Marketplace. I'm like, I'm like Game Your Game, or like Barbie and
Yeah.
something. I was like, I'll buy that Balls of Fury on DS. It's $1. I'm like, oh, like okay, like I'll
Yeah.
still get that. Like that's the only thing I avidly still will get. And I don't really go to stores a whole lot. And we have a few around here, like Second and Charles, I hadn't been to in a while. Um, but most of the things I've bought either, have been like eBay or like I said, they get me on Facebook Marketplace. Like you throw a couple Game Boy Color games at me for like $6 and a couple dollars shipping, I'm probably gonna buy it, like no matter what it is. So it's like that's where mine is, because Game Boy games are still pretty cheap. I mean, you have
Yeah.
those collector ones.
You think that's going to change to the analog pocket? Do you think these handheld games are going to go up in price, like the Neo Geo Pocket Color? That's already been kind of obscure. Do you see the price starting to increase because people are like, oh, now I'm going to start collecting for the Neo Geo Pocket Color on my analog?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I could see that, and I mean the like Neo Geo Pocket Color, like not the cheapest in the first place.
Right.
Same thing with like Lynx. Like I'd always thought about getting a Lynx, but it was still just like a bit too high. I was just like, nah, I can't
Hmm.
pay that. And you do have some, different ways to play Lynx games. I mean, EverDrives work on the Pocket too,
Hmm.
so I mean, I'd love to get some different systems loaded up, with some different games to play on there. And like I said, TurboGrafx, man, and you figure Analog also has their TurboGrafx like clone system that's
Oh
coming out as
yeah,
well.
that's going to be awesome. And something that I've noticed, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about it when it comes to retro collecting, especially with YouTubers, is as a content creator. it's hard for me to talk about retro. And the reason why it's hard for me to talk about retro is because, one, I've been doing it now for about almost 9 years. And it's gotten to the point where, like, how much more can I talk about? How much more can I bring to the table that's different from, say, another retro YouTuber? You know, and I think a lot of content creators who started out retro gaming channels are starting to feel that way. And plus, the hobby's gotten so expensive that it's like, okay, well, you know, I'd love to cover this game and I'd love to add this game to my collection, but it's way too expensive now. That's why, you know, and some people say it's cringe when I bring it up, but that's why I emulate. I'm like, man, I'm doing you a favor when I emulate to the collectors. I'm like, you know, I'm not that one person that's at flea markets or yard sales or Goodwills. I'm not in the competition. So, and I think a lot of people are starting to feel that way. A lot of people are like, you know what? I just want to play some old games. I don't want to pay these prices. And you know, now we got the whole WADA grading, like people getting their retro games graded. I saw a post a month ago where someone had gotten a graded Breath of the Wild. And I'm like, that game's not even it's like almost 5 years old. Like it's not an old game. And they're like, oh, look, this is a 98 graded Breath of the Wild. And I'm like, okay. They're like, oh, you know how hard it is to get that? I'm like, yeah, it's called driving to Best Buy. You know, you know, so I mean, I see so many things that are pushing people away. But the good thing is I'm also seeing a lot of progressive movements towards emulation with technology. I mean, now we got things like the Mister, which is the FPGA little computer like the Raspberry Pi, but it's not emulating software, it's emulating hardware, very similar to what we see with the analog consoles. That's starting to get really popular. The community's starting to grow with that. And I'm seeing a lot of, you know, people who back in the day used to have, you know, shelves on shelves of video games downgrading and just going and getting something like the Mister or getting a Raspberry Pi or getting, you know, a modded console of some sorts or EverDrives. There's just so much more that you can do compared to, you know, 8 years ago when I first started my channel. That technology wasn't there, or if it was there, it was not as accessible for, you know, people that are not into technology as much, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely just way easier now. It's like, and you can always run out of games. You know, like I said, if you focus on retro stuff, I mean, there's so many, but at some point, it's like everybody's done it.
Yeah, and I know like I've lost like some people who don't watch the channel anymore because they enjoyed my collection. They enjoyed when I do like pickup videos and stuff. But I still do pickup videos, but it's progressing to my play and tell series where I'm actually talking about the game that I'm playing. There's still games I'm picking up. There's still new games that I'm buying. There's still retro stuff I'm checking out that I've never played. But like, I don't have the desire anymore at this point. Here we are in 2022 to be like, I'm going to talk about, you know, my top 10 favorite NES games. Like, how much more can you dig back in your memories and talk about certain things? After a while, the well starts to dry up after a while. And I think that's what a lot of retro collectors and most importantly, retro content creators, because they're the most vocal, being like, it's not fun anymore. And it's because, one, it's hard to make content because there's an oversaturation of those channels. Everyone's doing retro at some degree. And two, it's gotten so expensive. You know, back in the day, it used to be like, oh, I'm going to review Musha, and you'd show Musha. And like, oh, man, everyone's got, he's got Musha. Now it's like, you know, I can buy a repro card of Musha for $3. I can get the Nintendo Switch online service and pay the extra fee for the Genesis games, and boom, Musha's on there, you know?
That's better than, what is that, probably like $100 more.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Because even the Genesis games are getting expensive. And Genesis was always like the more affordable 16-bit console. It's so weird.
It's just all too much. Nobody can afford it anymore, I don't think.
If you enjoyed this podcast clip, be sure to listen to the full episode on Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.